Good afternoon. Great, recording in progress. Good afternoon and welcome to the session. I'm Adriana, a Programme Manager, and as Leah said, I'll be chairing the session with our team here at Energy Saving Trust. You can go on to the next slide, Leah, if you like. So as Leah mentioned, we've been part of the LEAP4SME project since 2019, and as part of that we've been hosting a series of online discussion sessions. We've previously talked about what a strengthened policy framework looks like or should look like for SMEs in the UK. We've looked at best practices from around Europe, around things like subsidised audit schemes, and we've also discussed the need or not for a more standardised approach for energy audits. And in today's session, it's a big topic. We're focusing on financing and how to support SMEs fund decarbonisation, energy renovations and audits, and anything that improves their sustainability and energy efficiency. So the aim of the session, firstly, is to share the current gaps which exist in policy based on the research that we've done, and secondly, to look at examples of financing models which exist for SME decarbonisation, and finally to look at public financing options which exist for SMEs in the UK at the moment. So moving on to the next slide. Yes, so as Leah said, Energy Saving Trust, we're an independent organisation and about promoting energy efficiency to homes, but increasingly to businesses, and in the last few years we've focused on policy issues which affect small and medium-sized businesses. Firstly, through our participation in projects like this, like LEAP4SME, and also we've done research for the UK Climate Change Committee on how policies can better support SMEs to reach their net zero goals. And aside from the research and policy work that we've done, we also offer direct support to SMEs in Scotland through Business Energy Scotland, and offer services to businesses through the Measure Plan Act service. So yes, keen to further understand how we can better support SMEs in the most effective way through our work. And moving on to the next slide. So our interest really in supporting small businesses stems from recognising the sheer size of the challenge, with almost all UK businesses falling into the SME category and collectively responsible for a large proportion of carbon emissions on a national level. SMEs have been overlooked when designing policies in the past, and policies which could help them decarbonise. And also we appreciate the fact that there's a vast number of different types of businesses, all with different needs, all at different stages of the journey towards lower emissions, and that makes it very complex to design support and deliver that support effectively. Hence, again, our interest for furthering our understanding of all of these challenges so we can deliver the best possible support to SMEs. So moving on to the next slide. So yes, as I mentioned, we've done various bits of research under the European funded programme LEAP4SME, and also for the UK Climate Change Committee on the policy gaps which exist for supporting businesses in the UK. And both of our strands of research reach similar conclusions in terms of what the gaps are. And they are that there isn't a national decarbonisation strategy that is specifically aimed at SMEs in the UK. And the existing policies which do offer support are often spread over different entities, and there's a range of responsible parties and frameworks. And from our research, we saw that this disjointed approach means that SMEs aren't able to get the support and decarbonise at a rate that is needed. And also another key gap is around the financing. So there's an absence of a national level, either grant or loan to support SMEs with energy efficiency, aside from some standalone boiler upgrade schemes. And also no free or subsidised advice or audit service, so doing an energy audit to help businesses understand what they need to do, where they need to start, so that doesn't exist on a national level. But yes, having said that, the picture is different across the various nations. So across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, there are different levels of support. So in Scotland, there is the Business Energy Scotland service, which offers advice and also free energy assessments, and businesses can be signposted to financial support, and also the Scottish Government funds a zero interest loan. Northern Ireland, there's funding available for businesses through NICEP for some energy efficiency projects, so there's some support for funding and audits through there. And Business Wales also offers funding and advice and some mentorship. But SME decarbonisation support in England has tended to be delivered through the European Regional Development Fund, the ERDF. And ERDF projects have delivered some really interesting results, but they haven't been coordinated in a way that can really address the gap that exists on a national level and be a standard for national level support. And post-Brexit, the ERDF fund has been replaced with the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And although this is very welcome news, this fund isn't specifically aimed at SMEs, and it's not specifically aimed at decarbonisation for SMEs. So it has a very wide remit. And we'll we're very happy to have more information on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund later on in this session. And moving on to the next slide. So in terms of our observations from our work, we concluded that what's needed is a joint up policy and support framework, a UK-wide plan for SME decarbonisation that really addresses the issue of the upfront financing and the knowledge constraints which exist around what can a business do to lower their emissions. There's a need for a clear regulatory timetable so that SMEs know what changes are coming, they know what they need to do to respond, and they have that confidence to invest in changes to how their businesses run. And also the support side, so financing is one thing, but also a support framework which includes advice, awareness raising, offers signposting to financing options, or if it's a more one-stop shop style service, offer financing options directly. And yeah, audit services would be useful in that framework as well. And on to the next slide. So yes, another observation from the work that we've done is that the support that SMEs needs to take into account all of the different types of businesses in all of the different sectors, and having something tailored is really important. So working with sector representatives to design support for tailored to address specific issues in certain sectors would be really productive. And also we've seen that peer networks of SMEs have been really effective in the UK and other European countries, where they act as a platform for knowledge sharing, and we've seen that these have been particularly useful for specialist sectors that need more in-depth advice, energy intensive sectors. So that is just a brief introduction to the work that EST has done and our interest in the sector and what we have seen so far. And now, to help us understand the challenges around financing in more detail, I'd like to welcome Dr. Robin Owen, an associate professor at Middlesex University, who specialises in early stage SME innovation, finance and clean tech innovation financing, and who will be giving an overview of the current landscape of the green financing for SMEs in the UK. So Robin, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm just about to try and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. So thank you for your introduction. We're coming up full screen yet? Yes?
Yeah, there we go. Perfect.
Right.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you for the introduction and for giving a very good summary of the problems and issues involved. I'm going to delve a little bit deeper, so a slight unpeeling of the onion layers here, but as you've heard, this is a complex set of issues around the heterogeneity of SMEs and also the mishmash of policy, which hasn't really helped. The need for better integration of policy is clearly great here. So I will summarise very briefly in the next few minutes financing for SME greening, and what I mean by that is in terms of the broad environmental aims of SMEs to mitigate against climate change and wider environmental issues. So one might include nature positive in that, but I know the focus here is on net zero. And I'm going to look at the UK small business evidence base to some extent, where it exists, and the policy evidence around the role for local authorities, which I certainly see from my work as being hugely relevant to this in terms of giving leadership where perhaps central government has not been giving leadership. So just to give a very brief background on my background here, I'm going to be reporting from some of the recent research that Greenfin, which is a research cluster at Middlesex University, has been involved with in the last few years. So probably the last 2 to 3 years have been the main focus of activity of my research, has been really around the greening of SMEs, and particularly the finance markets and the way in which finance can work together with support policy to deliver the required objectives here, which are to green the SMEs. So the background, which I will run through very quickly, as we're all aware, COP26 in Glasgow really sort of catapulted the UK emphasis and government policies around the greening of SMEs. We saw the British Business Bank, for instance, enter the fray for the first time, really, in making some indications that it will take this on board in terms of its finance policies. But up to now, there's been insufficient UK government policy response in terms of greening of SMEs. Certainly smaller businesses really go under the radar. They don't have to report on their environmental issues. And for many of them, they don't really see the real importance of engaging with environmental mitigation and net zero. Although perhaps they're seeing that more with the changes in energy prices and the need to adjust their business models and practices. So within this, we see that there's been a very poor policy mix from the UK government, and particularly within England. We've heard that the devolved governments have different approaches, some better than others. But we see that there has been a very important role for local authorities, growth hubs, LEPs, in the delivery within England, certainly, of net zero type programs. Government and SMEs are facing a considerable amount of economic turbulence. So therefore, energy is becoming more important, but as are other problems with business survival around the outcomes of Brexit, various economic crises, and of course the follow-on from the pandemic. So we see small businesses really struggling in many sectors, and therefore finding difficulties to raise funding and to prioritise funding around specifically net zero. So there's a lot of competing and conflicting activities going on, which are maybe moving business policy and government policy away from the long-term horizon thinking towards short-term solutions, firefighting. And this is a problem. SMEs, as we've heard, are representative of most businesses, 99% of all businesses in the UK, certainly well over half of employment in private sector employment and GVA, but also pollution. So they are considerable emitters of pollution. So there's a need for, I would say, a wider nature positive approach which addresses net zero, but also other factors. We need to consider the security for energy, food, water, and health. So all these matters need to come together in our thinking and in the programs that are developed to support SMEs. SMEs urgently require green education, training, skills, and financing. And potentially, as I've mentioned, there's a major role for local authorities to deliver support and funding schemes to overcome the patchy supply at the moment, which has been undertaken through ERDF and potentially in the future through the Shared Prosperity Fund. The initial evidence base that I can give is fairly limited. Since our focus is on energy, we can look at the longitudinal small business survey of BEIS. The Department for Business has particularly focused on energy and net zero in terms of its data collection. And here we have the largest small business survey in the UK, collecting data for relatively small amounts, nevertheless, of small businesses in the UK over the last 2 to 3 years. And what's clear from this is if you look at net zero type schemes around energy, small businesses still lack awareness of the types of government programs that are out there. So even in the last year or two, around about half are not really aware of the schemes that are out there, any of the schemes. And if we look at the take-up of schemes, it's very, very small. This is just around awareness, awareness of the specific schemes, the energy technology list, equipment that might be suitable for net zero approaches for businesses, enhanced capital allowance, which is problematic because it's taken away to some extent, then replaced by a generic scheme, private rented sector regulations, which conflict and potentially stop or prevent businesses that are tenants from doing as much work around greening as they might wish to do. Renewable heat incentive, heat pumps and so on. Again, there's something which was removed. So there's a conflict of issues there. Smart meter rollout, which certainly demonstrates the advantages of smart meters. Workplace EV charge scheme, which is limited to a small amount of funding for EV charging, and also the energy savings option scheme. So these are all relatively limited in terms of the awareness of small businesses in the UK. What we do find around the heterogeneity of small businesses is that very few have a green mission and are really aiming to become greener. If you like, they're the leading vanguard businesses that have green missions. Around about a quarter state they have a green mission, and they're more likely to be the ones that are actually making the investments around net zero. But they tend to be the larger end of the small businesses, and they tend to be the ones that already have sufficient surplus of funding that they can invest in these areas. What we do find that the decisions to invest in net zero energy options, renewable energy options, tend to be taken in terms of the financial benefits. What is the risk reward? And therefore financing is taking place because the funding is available to do so, and it's likely to reduce the costs, in running costs of the business. So there has to be a business case. It's significantly associated with SMEs that are in profit, who can afford the, and government grants are associated also with larger businesses, those that can already afford the investments in many respects. The smaller businesses with less resources seem to be disadvantaged here. And that's the main takeout, I would say, here, is that if you're going to have financing schemes with targets, target the most disadvantaged small businesses, because the others can afford to make the changes. In terms of local authority related support activities, as was mentioned, ERDF has been the main area of work, funding through LEPs and growth hubs, and the evaluations of such schemes demonstrate the patchy access and use of competition funds and the limited core funding for SME support. So therefore, there's a shortage of funding out there, and it's being taken up very much by those that are successful in competition funding. Access to finance programs under ERDF were often not green specific. The development of online support tools has been very patchy, but some have developed around net zero guidance and to guide businesses in terms of their carbon mapping and so on. SME aggregation schemes have had very mixed success. So we reviewed several of these. One in Cornwall for remote businesses was very successful in bringing businesses together to work together to get financial leverage through economies of scale of joint purchasing and so on. One in Lincolnshire was very unsuccessful because of cultural differences and the difficulties getting small businesses to work together. Having clusters of businesses which are like-minded and have a common purpose is probably the best way to go about this. In terms of net zero manufacturing programs, there is one currently running with Oxford Innovation that we've looked at, which seems to be quite successful. Noticeably, the funding that's gone into the small businesses in manufacturing in Yorkshire and the north of England has tended to be not through mainstream bank finance. So that's an interesting finding. Alternative bank lending, challenger banks, funding circle, and various other forms of funding have actually funded these changes. In London, the Mayor's GLA Better Futures programme, and notably we've been working with West London Business. I mean, they've had net zero SME funding support in the sense of small voucher schemes to encourage the use of advisors and small amounts of funding towards renewable equipment, energy, and so on. The offer, advice, signposting, small grants, match funding, service vouchers, and so on that has been offer a range of different types of support which can help to green businesses, and for innovation, which is an important area, green business innovators. There's been linking towards impact investors from angel networks and alternative funders. High street banks have been offering some preferential terms around environmental technology list lending, and some insurers and hire purchase companies have been offering preferential terms as well, but this is early days. In terms of conclusions and recommendations we had around our findings from both the empirical evidence of the secondary data from BEIS and the Small Business Survey, and also from some of our ERDF type projects, is that yes, there is increasing awareness of government energy efficiency schemes, but it's still fairly low. It could be better. In terms of the impact of COVID, that's actually reduced the amount of users at schemes, although it has bounced back a bit in recent times. And there was more use of schemes and more awareness in greener renewable energy regions, those which have more use of renewable energy, and around where there are sector and green mission clusters, particularly in sectors, as we heard, which may be at the sharp end of environmental regulation and more aware of their environmental consequences. So we recommended a more coherent government SME net zero awareness raising programme and packages targeting sectors and locations. So there's a key role here for local authorities if better funded. In terms of green mission and green action SMEs, they tend to be larger, more innovative, growth orientated. So better financed businesses are clearly making the changes and they're using the grants, but we need better targeting to those that are lagging behind, need persuasion, need to see the risk reward balance changed, and the business case, the bottom line financial case. So we need to target financing into that area and support into that area. The smaller, harder to reach businesses in many respects. So our recommendation was better advice, supportive public financing, grants, loans, soft loans, green investment, tax credits to advise on where those are available, and to understand and rebalance the financial trade-offs. Again, local authorities can offer an honest broker role in that sense. Green actions have been constrained for tenant businesses, so we recommend to reduce the prisoner effect, if you like, of businesses in tenant situation. So we need landlord action. An interesting scheme there was the Somerset House scheme, where the landlord worked with the greening of supply chains for tenant businesses located there. That seemed to be quite successful, so that offered an interesting model. The longitudinal small business survey environmental data is limited, so we called for better data. And a finding out of all of that is that, of course, local authorities in making their cases, or the LEPs in making their cases, need to collect better data themselves and use data to make the cases for their financial programs in order to win projects. So next steps, there are a few other advisories that I would mention, in the sense that I do think that net zero is absolutely an imperative, and getting the right funding to SMEs is vital to make the changes necessary and quicker. But also it's important that all of this is seen in the round within the wider environmental context. So there's a really, really strong case here, both at central government level to bring together different departments. DEFRA is very different from Department for Business and Department for Energy. These need to come together for a more coordinated central government plan, but also at the local authority level, local authorities could benefit considerably from taking on board the need for a wider environmental perspective, because this can draw in, I think, more finance and for a more rounded programme of support. So here I would welcome the development of a roadmap at the high level for from central government, but also for local authorities to look in terms of how they can support, guide, provide environmental health checkers to small businesses, and provide a wide range of finance, as mentioned previously, that would be more suitable. So the next steps in terms of the increased local government role would be to align your policies with UN Sustainable Development Goals, have a green economy action plan. The London Borough of Hounslow is the lead borough for the GLA, has done so, so there's a good guidance. The ERDF is closing, Shared Prosperity Fund, Green Business SME proposals for capacity building, advice, services and funding into key sectors and localities which offer EDI, outreach and levelling up. They need to have well-rounded programmes here, improve SME aggregation support schemes for premises, equipment, IT efficiency, supply chains, business and green and blue community programmes, bring people and places together, develop the smart cities or smart environments, develop green innovation enterprise zones, and West London freight and logistics is something we're working on at the moment. So work on key sectors and innovating them and sector groups. Green free ports, the WASH plan is a fascinating thing to have a look at. The importance of local authority biodiversity registers for land planning. Look at the Environment Act 2021 and the fact that we've got biodiversity net gain coming in, and that could be a really important role for local authorities as an income generator. If you can manage land as an honest broker, but also look towards providing advocacy and land-based services, actually take that role on as Warwickshire and Worcestershire county councils are looking at, rather than let the private market run perhaps roughshod over this and profit make, where local authorities could perhaps run land bank schemes locally and plough back surplus into the greening of SMEs. So I think that's a really interesting area to work in. And there are some other interesting leveraging of private sector funding areas to work with. But collaborative working across local authorities, so you have groups of local authorities, groups of LEPs working together, would raise the significant scale needed to run things like green bond schemes, which wouldn't work, I think, at individual local authority levels. So there's some thinking to do around that. So that's really where I'll end. Hopefully you've got some questions. I hope I haven't gone too long. And here's just a list of some of the current and recent related projects that we've been involved with. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Robin. That was great. And yes, please do put any questions that you might have in the chat as we go along, and then we can tackle them after each presentation. But yes, I'll kick off with a question from me, Robin. So you talked a lot about targeting the most disadvantaged businesses in a way, and I think that's an interesting concept. It's a bit like a means-tested support program for home energy retrofits and things like that. I mean, is there a good way of doing that? Like, how do you target the most disadvantaged businesses? Is it just through intermediaries who know the area well and know how to reach out to disadvantaged businesses, or maybe there's a better way of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge, and I don't like the language of means testing businesses. But what I do think is that our findings definitely demonstrate that there's a fundamental difference between businesses that are established and have 10 or more employees, and therefore they are small or medium-sized enterprises, often with surplus, and those that are micro enterprises, which are finding it much harder perhaps to fund, particularly earlier stage businesses, younger businesses, but also just generally smaller businesses. So I don't think we need to means test smaller businesses, but I think we can really target in at, for instance, micros as an area where they are less likely to have the resource base and knowledge, but more likely to really capitalize and grow from these types of funding and support packages. Because the other finding we've had is that green transition isn't easy. It's quite frictional in terms of business performance. So therefore, the assumption that efficiencies will click in just like that, and therefore doing something green is going to improve the profit line, profit margin, is not necessarily the case in the short term. The payback periods could be considerable, and the transition period of changing to greener practices and greener business models might take time, might require staff training, additional costs, additional support services, even, I would say, importantly, around IT and digital efficiencies that have been talked about a lot by the Enterprise Research Centre and some in government around easy quick wins for efficiencies of businesses, which actually are only quick wins if the support packages are there to make sure that IT is used properly and implemented properly, rather than just supported via vouchers and then left alone. So I think targeting is a holistic thing, and that's important. So target the harder to reach, perhaps, which is tough, but just target smaller businesses and ensure that they get the ongoing support. How can they be measured and supported to some extent? Well, if you've got some tracker mechanisms and online tools which can be used quite easily, some of this can be teased out, I think.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so targeting the smaller businesses and creating a service that works for that size of business, I suppose. Okay, great. Just have a comment in the chat from Mary Louise. We have a number of schemes, including Greenbelt Grant Scheme, ERDF and Zeller. It is very difficult reaching out and engaging with micro businesses that make up 89% of our SMEs in Leicester and Leicestershire. Would you recommend as to how we could target them? I think the key point from the answer was just make services that are tailored to the micro business needs, and anything else to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I do take the point that there's a lot of businesses out there that they kind of go under the radar, and anyway, they're not going to respond readily to a lot of campaigns and so on. They actually, they're in a way, one of our biggest problems is the kind of contented laggard here, where you've got many businesses which don't see it as their problem. And in some respects, that needs something at a very high level, like a national campaign. So, and I think the local authorities aren't in the position to deal with that. So I do think central government is lacking there. We could lobby central government to do a lot better in terms of raising awareness with a proper centralised national campaign, which would help. But then you need to be resourced to deliver at the local level. So the next step down is actually having service provision which is welcoming and open and well promoted, at least online, and therefore serviceable. But I do take the fact that this is a massive challenge.
Yeah. So an advice service at a national level would be helpful here to play that role of raising awareness.
Well, you know, we do have a climate hub, but I don't know how many businesses actually ever go there. And when I last looked at the numbers, it was like 3,000 or 4,000 businesses, and then they took that off. So I don't know whether that's, you know, huge numbers now, or whether it's just a few thousand, which is pitiful. So if that's the case, the latter is the case, then the central government is really doing a very poor job of promoting this.
Okay, great. Well, room for improvement and development there. Okay, well, thank you so much, Robin, for that. We'll leave it there and move on to our next speaker, who is Alex Rathmell, Managing Director of EP Consultancy, who is also an expert in the clean energy sector, who will talk to us about ESCO in a Box, which is one of the more innovative financing mechanisms that are used and trialled in the UK and beyond. So Alex, I'll pass on to you. Oh, there we go. Okay, we see your screen.
With me, everybody. You would think I'd be a bit quicker at this after how many years after lockdown, but here we go.
No, all good. Brilliant, thank you.
Does that look right,
yeah.
Andrew?
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Well, look, thanks very much for having me. Nice to speak to you all. Yeah, my name's Alex Rathmell, and I'm Managing Director for EP Connect, which is a brand name of EP Group. But essentially, we are we have a consultancy division, which is the bit that I look after. We have a projects division and a finance and asset management division. But everything we do is in the field of net zero, and most of that is in the field of energy efficiency and finance for energy efficiency in particular. So we provide a lot of advice around, I suppose, the innovative business models and the innovations that are needed to try and increase uptake of efficiency, and you know the financial means of doing that, I suppose. The important thing to note, though, is that access to finance on its own is enough to increase traction with energy efficiency, and it's in that sort of context that the presentation I'm about to go through with you should be understood, I suppose. So, you know, the starting point for this is just to kind of furiously agree with the previous speaker and the analysis there of some of the barriers to energy efficiency among SMEs, which certainly resonates with our experience. I think part of the problem is the use of SME as a kind of category, which is a sort of absurdly broad category, really. You know, if you think about Amazon or you know, any kind of online retailer that's trying to sell you stuff by recommending it and trying to get you to change your behavior, they've probably got a very sophisticated there's probably almost as many customer profiles as there are customers, and yet when it comes to trying to get businesses to do energy efficiency, we just sort of say, oh, SMEs all together. There's hundreds of thousands of them, and yet we just sort of lump them all together. And within that, there's a huge spectrum of decision-making behaviors and standards of corporate governance and you know, bankability from a access to finance perspective. Anyway, so just to firmly agree with that point and many of the other specific points. But I suppose it's against that backdrop that we developed ESCO in a box, which is the thing that I'm here to speak to you about. ESCO is Energy Services Company. So I tend to play fast and loose with the definition of an ESCO, but for the purposes of this, we kind of mean a particular form of ESCO called an energy performance contract, whereby you use the energy cost savings that you create by doing an energy saving project to pay for the project itself. So you're paying from savings and often paying back some kind of loan or other financial product that's allowed you to do the project. So we developed ESCO in a box in response to, well, we're in the middle of an ongoing partnership with Low Carbon Hub in Oxford and also Oxford Brookes University. We were advising Low Carbon Hub, who were an umbrella organisation for community energy groups across Oxfordshire. We were advising them on how they should be supporting SMEs to do energy efficiency projects, with obviously helping businesses to undertake renewables, rooftop PV particularly, but also to take sensible steps to reduce demand at the same time. And that can be quite a complicated thing to do. It's arguably much more complicated than than renewables, although obviously that has its own challenges. So that was the sort of exam question we were answering: is how can we provide a service to local businesses in Oxfordshire? We were calling it already at that point a community ESCO, to help them to do those projects. And our take on that was, well, if we're helping a business to create a cost saving, maybe it's appropriate to take a tiny slice of that saving and use it to keep the service going. So that's the ESCO bit. It's a self-funding means of delivering ongoing support for businesses that revolves around helping them do projects, create savings, and then capturing a small fee from that saving in order to pay for the service. So a decisive move away from relying on wave after wave of grant funding, in order to kind of keep dishing that out to businesses. So that was the idea, and we fortunately were able to access just over £1 million from Bayes in the end to develop it, and also to set up the first one of these, which is called Energy Solutions Oxfordshire, and that was in 2020, and we did all of that in the middle of COVID, which was tricky, but we have been able to achieve some success on the back of that. I'll go through some examples a bit later, but we have found that this is something that particularly kind of resonates right now with local authorities in particular. Our take on it is that, and this is not necessarily an original take, but lots of local authorities in the UK have declared climate emergencies. They've declared a net zero target. They've often done that without having gone through a detailed process of examining how they can get to that target, what's the technical roadmap to get there and how they're going to fund it. So there is there is a need for them to engage at an unprecedented scale with all sorts of challenges, but we point to three in particular. They need to decarbonise their own estate, and many of them are well on the way to doing that, and there are pots of funds that can be accessed for that. They need to tackle housing, and that's an area where there's a lot of innovation going on, and perhaps a move towards the one-stop shop model, which you're seeing in Europe in particular. And they need to engage all their businesses. And I think this is a particularly challenging area. You've got a situation where a local authority is wearing the target, we'll get to net zero by 2040 or something. But perhaps lacking the funds, the depth of capacity, etc., to help businesses on that journey, even to engage them in the first place. And that's particularly acute with the demise of ERDF funding, which I think was touched on earlier, because a lot of the business support, things like energy audit programs, have been traditionally funded through ERDF, European Structural Funding, and of course all of that's coming to an end. And I think we're going to talk later in the session about UK Shared Prosperity Fund. But I think it is certainly a moment in time where that challenge is being keenly felt, and there's also a lot of rearrangement of things like LEPs and growth hubs with the current, move towards devolution deals and the like, which was also affecting things. Anyway, so our suggestion is that a service that can use a standardized approach, sorry, let me go back to that one, use a standardized approach to recruit SMEs to do this work, help them develop projects, provide them with an incredibly easy pathway for delivering those projects, provide access to finance, and use local labour to do the work in order to create an economic benefit for the area. We think that all of that can be achieved using an ESCO model. Now, clearly, there's a need to find some funds to start these services up, but over a period of time, they can start to pay for themselves and become, we hope, a permanent support service for businesses in a particular region. So that's what we're trying to create, and we've done a lot of the hard work to create the standardized operating system, if you like, all the standard contracts, the software platform, that sort of thing. What we're finessing all the time is the route to market and the theory of change that you use when you get there. And I wanted to just say some words about that in a second, because I'm really interested in the feedback of this audience on our thinking in that area. As we said at the start, it's very hard to get SMEs to this stuff. I don't think there are any wrong answers, but there are some answers that are quite limited, and I think we might be at the limits of exploring some of those. So I just want to see what everybody thinks of our approach. All right, so just on that theme, yeah, energy efficiency makes good sense. From a business perspective, it can offer a payback in a few short years from the energy cost savings that are achieved. We all know that. We all know that it can potentially improve the working environment. It can have all sorts of other beneficial effects, and yet most businesses have never done an energy efficiency project, or they might have done by accident, by buying a more efficient piece of equipment to replace one that was less efficient. But a lot of them have never really thought about it, and even now with energy prices being kind of front and center in a way they haven't been for a while, not seeing that that's particularly translating into, well, we should do energy efficiency. I think it's translating into, well, where's the support from government to help me through this difficult patch, which is understandable. But, we don't want to be too hard on businesses. They've got to run their business. That's what in society, that's what we need them to be focused on. They need to run their business and survive. They need an energy efficiency project to be very low risk and very low disruption. They need to put their capital to work, if they've got any, in their core business, and so all of that's understandable. We can address all of those barriers, but the bottom one on here is that often when this is offered to them, it's offered in a very reductive way that doesn't really that causes only a small proportion of businesses to actually take it up. So our observations, and I'm drawing here on some research from a chap called Sam Hampton at University of Oxford. There's the next few slides are courtesy of him. He kindly spoke when we launched ESCO in a box. He kindly spoke at our launch event. So the traditional approach, which is used everywhere, is to do an energy audit and to make the business aware of what they could do on energy efficiency. That's perfectly sensible. So you're overcoming information barriers. But what you're also doing there, in most cases, is relying on the business to take the next steps itself. And most of them don't. We all know that from statutory audit schemes like ESOS. We know that from more voluntary schemes. They might take action on the low cost or no cost stuff, but the capital projects don't happen in great numbers, or the only ones that do are the ones that attract some sort of grant contribution towards them. And typically what happens when they get sold energy efficiency projects, in the private sphere, is that it's very reductive in terms of the way it's expressed. So it's all about cost savings, payback periods, or you can get a grant, or you can get a time limited access to some sort of perk. So now's the time to do it. So then it goes in a pile with a load of other financial stuff and kind of never happens, you know. If you make it through to the technical stage, then you're in a whole nother world of trying to find contractors that you can trust as a business, which is hard. It's a bit of a minefield from the point of view of what accreditations they should have, etc. And the environmental benefits kind of, there's always a sense, and I'm speaking as somebody that's worked in the murky world of selling people energy efficiency equipment, there's almost a sense that the environmental benefits are sort of second fiddle. You know, we're the grown-ups talk about the financial case, you know, and the business case and the kind of hard numbers. Our suggestion is that the sort of time for that is over, and that it's time to take a sort of slightly different approach. And what Sam's research oriented around was drawing on the values of the business that you're talking to. So that maybe they're passionate about the environment. They've probably seen all the same David Attenborough documentaries as you have, you know, that they're probably worried about this stuff or on behalf of their kids or whatever. And so they might bring some of those values to work if you can just tap into them. And, you know, we've got a couple of examples here of some of the value systems that might be in evidence that could be tapped into. You know, so you've got here the manager of a family business. My father was a true countryman in that he wouldn't be damaging the world of the countryside in particular. Okay, something we can work with there, even a business that might be operating in a very sort of conservative sector. You know, climate change, I don't believe we're contributing to that. We still get this, you know, we still get that objection. What's the point in doing anything when China and India are so much bigger, but the plastic in the oceans is awful? Well, that's something you can key into, isn't it? That there must be a project there that makes business sense that can be facilitated on behalf of that business. So it's about kind of keying into what value system they're bringing to work. And some good news stories are also a good place to start. We decided we would invest in renewable technology. If nobody ever did, there'd be no research. It was a loss leader, not a loss leader, it was a loss. So that's, you know, going above and beyond, you know, that's demonstrating values, and that's something that other businesses could potentially be inspired by as well. So again, there's a value there that we can key into. So the problem with the Amazon example that I mentioned at the beginning is that all Amazon's customers are online, and so that's something they've all got in common. When you're dealing with businesses, then they're everywhere. Some of them are, you know, reliant on their physical location. That is their business. If you run a pet grooming salon, then that's where you are, you know. So you've got to kind of find what these businesses have in common. And I think that the most logical approach that we could see was to look at businesses in a locality and to approach them in a way that is relevant to that locality and immediate and something that they're going to care about. I always use the example of sponsoring roundabouts. You know, businesses sponsor roundabouts because it's something of beauty, maybe that's too strong a word, but it's something attractive that and green that they can be associated with. It gives them visibility in their community because, you know, their local reputation really matters to them. Even if they're serving customers that are further afield, they're still locally owned probably and employ local people, still have a relationship with the local community that they're sitting in. So our suggestion is that the best way to approach small and medium businesses and to embrace their various, sometimes illogical approaches to decision making is to do it locally, to be patient and to be, the word is kind. That actually came up in a survey that an organization did. I've forgotten which organization, somebody might know, where the single key word that came up in what do you want from a business support service around energy? We want it to be kind. So we want it to be understanding of the barriers and the pressures that we face as businesses and to be there when we need it. So again, that lends itself to something that has a long-term, patient, you know, stable financial footing rather than having to use a time-limited grant scheme and discharge it as quickly as possible, you know. So trust, I think, is the key word here. Build their trust by speaking their language and being locally available. Anyway, so our approach that we advocate is a one-stop shop approach. So we haven't invented that, but we've invented, I suppose, an operating system to make it viable. So the idea is that you set up a local ESCO, energy services company, that manages projects. Well, it goes out and finds projects to do by engaging with businesses, manages the whole project from start to finish, uses that values-led approach to make sure that it's being correctly valued, I suppose, by the business, and therefore stands a chance of happening. And it's delivered entirely by local contractors that have been pre-approved, so that the business customer doesn't have to kind of hunt through the yellow pages or whatever to work out which contractors they might be able to trust to do the work. That's done for them by the one-stop shop. So what we've been doing is creating a standard system for doing that. So it's structured around the packages that you can see on there. So it's everything about starting up one of these services and marketing it, standardized contracts, which I'll go through if I get time, and then how you support a supply chain and a network of local contractors, and then how you run it effectively as a business, although it's a business with a not-for-profit or a profit-for-purpose structure to it. So we license that package to different ESCOs. Our first one was Energy Solutions Oxfordshire. So if you want to see how it looks in a kind of mature form, energysolutionsOxfordshire.org is a good place to look. And we have in the UK, we've been working with the LEP in Greater Birmingham Solihull to try and get something up and running there. We've just launched a service in Devon at the end of last year, so decarbonise Devon. We have some services up and running in East Anglia, but we're taking a slightly different approach there. We've also done a feasibility study for Wales, and we're just in the process of discussing that with Welsh Government, and there's various other ones in different stages of gestation. So we've got a few UK examples that are all these kind of regional one-stop shops. The overseas applications for it have kind of taken us by surprise, but there's a lot of interest in ESCO models as a way of accelerating energy efficiency markets. So we have programs now in East Africa and Southeast Asia. We also have a client in the US as well, where we're really combining ESCO in a box with a fund that provides capital for the projects, and we've got some good uptake of the solution in those parts of the world. Okay, so you get the idea. This is how it works. So there's an operating system that that's licensed by a local ESCO, and then they market it according to the needs of the local business community, taking each client through this series of steps. So a free feasibility study. I think I've got these slides actually. Sorry. Let's just skip those. Free feasibility study, and then into a more detailed design once the client has expressed some interest and committed to covering the costs. Energy services agreement, where essentially the ESCO commits to delivering a particular saving, and ideally we want that saving to be more than enough to cover on a monthly basis any repayments that need to be made from any finance. So the ESCO would arrange finance at that point. Worth just saying actually that essentially our ESCOs in the UK at the moment are offering two different types of finance. They can offer leases and hire purchases. So those are leases that are secured against the assets like LED lighting, heat pumps, whatever, that are going in. And the other is simply signposting to green loan products that banks are making available, because they've actually improved quite a lot in the last few years. The challenge with all of that is that it's quite expensive finance. What the UK urgently needs is a low interest or interest-free loan scheme for SME energy efficiency, like we used to have. And it would be great to get that back. And this model, I think, could be a really effective way of taking that to market through this local facilitation service. But anyway, you can access finance through the ESCO, and it's perfectly okay if the business decides to pay for the project itself. That absolutely works in the model as well. So the ESCO helps the client to deliver the project, well, delivers it for them, essentially by working with those contractors, and then make sure that it's working and verifies its performance. And hopefully we then go around the loop again and do the next project and the next one and the next one. And that, I think, offers a structured way of getting businesses all the way to net zero if they value that support and that hand-holding, that kind of easy pathway, I suppose. I won't go through the finance slides in any detail because I'm wittering on a bit, but I will just go through this very quickly with you. So this is Energy Solutions Oxfordshire. The award-winning Energy Solutions Oxfordshire, I should say. So this was the data from their first year market engagement in just in the county. So they reached out to 2,000 businesses and qualified 98 actual projects, so proper projects, of which 34 were in delivery at that point in time, which I think was summer 21, I think. So the reason I put those there is that it's just giving you an idea of how many businesses you've got to engage to get down to that many projects delivered. So you really need this to be an ongoing effort, you know, something that happens for several years really in a locality. Obviously use grants and things like that to get businesses to the table. They love a carrot, you know, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But this is something that requires patience, because it might be that those businesses will only act when it comes to a particular point in the lease on their building, or at a particular point in the business cycle if the facility is shut down or something like that. So we've got to be there for them when they need it. Typical project size is about 50 to 100k, that sort of range. ESOX, Energy Solutions Oxfordshire, don't do anything less than 30k, but actually in Devon they're looking at no lower limit really. They're helping very small businesses, lifestyle businesses, you know, that kind of thing. It just gets, the economics just get more challenging as it gets very, very small. That's all. And obviously if you can mix in some very large businesses, large projects, sorry, with those smaller ones, then that really helps. And the technologies, I mean, no surprises really, but LEDs are virtually everywhere. You know, almost every project still involves LED lighting, which just goes to show that maybe it doesn't have the traction that perhaps we all thought it did. Sorry, the penetration that perhaps we all thought it did. Heat pumps, we originally expected to be selling loads of gas boilers through this route, you know, gas boiler upgrades, but so far nobody wants a new gas boiler. These businesses will want to go straight to a heat pump, and I think that tells you something about them being early adopters, as it were. You know, and then sort of sensible controls, BMS upgrades, rooftop PV where it's appropriate. And the point of the model really is to try and take a holistic view of any fabric measures that should also be implemented, and where possible, try and roll those into a composite project with, you know, quick payback stuff like LEDs. The little tiny map there is showing where all the contractors are for the Oxfordshire project. So it's just to give you a sort of high level view. The point is that over 80% of them are within 50 miles of Oxford. So there's a real concentration of economic value from creating this work, but with some further afield where there are more specialist requirements, for example. And yeah, just by way of summary. So, I mean, I said this at the beginning, but we are busy rolling this out. Probably makes it sound a bit more grand than it really is, but we are experiencing quite a lot of uptake and a lot of interest, and it's certainly the main part of my job now, and some of my team as well. So we've been really pleased to see that. I think, you know, there is a sense that a rocket could be lit under this with not very much intervention from either central government or well, probably central government, but you know, I think we're starting to demonstrate that there's an appetite for it and that it can make sense, and they can start to their own these facilitation bodies, which takes the obligation away from local authorities, and it takes it away a little bit from government to just keep putting in grant funding to this stuff. But don't get me wrong, we need the grant funding right now because we need to get these services up and running. Businesses need help right now, so it's not a reason to sort of slow down, quite the opposite. But yeah, we're actively looking for other regions where there's, you know, good conditions would be like an active community energy sector, a positively minded local authority, a growth hub looking for a route to provide business support for net zero. We've been working in partnership with lots of different organizations to get this stuff up and running. So if anyone you know is interested, then we would be delighted to have a conversation. And that's it. I can see Adriana's appeared on the screen to say you need to stop talking now. So I will do. But thanks very much for your time, all. Nice to speak to you, and very happy to take any questions.
Great, yes, thank you, Alex. That was really clear, and yeah, there's a couple of questions. First one was just a clarification for me as someone who's not as into the detail of ESCOs, but what type of business could become an ESCO? What I mean, is it a business that exists that could adapt into being an ESCO, or would it need to be a newly formed company?
Well, so we've broadly got two categories of partner at the moment. And in the UK, what we've been doing actually exclusively is kind of creating our own ESCOs in partnership with local organisations. So just really quickly, in Oxfordshire, it's with Low Carbon Hub, who are an existing community interest company. They're a very big one as it goes, and you know, have lots of projects under management at any one time.
And would
in
they
Devon,
need to have
right,
some technical skill in
Yeah.
order to, or do they have that existing technical skill and were able to
yeah,
take on this extra?
that's a really good point. So they have a long-standing partnership with Oxford Brookes University to provide that technical. I mean, they're very, you know, they know what they're doing themselves, but they have technical capacity via that route. In Devon, where we've been working the last sort of 6 months or so, we're hosted. The ESCO is hosted by a community interest company, much smaller than Low Carbon Hub, but it's owned by community energy organisations from across the county. So any profit that it makes in a few years would be redistributed to those community energy organisations for their kind of core activities. Now, in that case, they didn't have that kind of technical capability, so we've had to sort of help them bring that in, and we've brought in a team, you know, all local people that are now working for Decarbonise Devon, just 3 of them, and then they're working with the community organisations to do some of the frontline services in the towns and cities around Devon. And then, yeah, different models elsewhere. The other type of client that we have is, I suppose, a business like our US client, a business that already does something in energy efficiency. So they do lighting projects that want to offer it on a pay from savings or a kind of as a service, in which case it's a good way to sort of learn how to do that and get the toolkit to do that. What we've tried to do, though, is to design our ESCO model so that you don't need to be like Honeywell or Johnson Controls, or, you know, you don't need to be a great big company with a huge balance sheet to offer these services, because that's one of the limitations of the sort of traditional ESCO model. We've tried to design it so that it's accessible to small organisations, indeed organisations with no trading history. There's some various sort of ways that we've done that, which are probably a bit beyond the scope of this, but essentially by working very carefully with key suppliers in the region to make sure that performance risk is backed off to those suppliers. Yeah, so how to answer your question,
Yes.
you can be a new organisation or an existing one, and it can work either way.
Okay, so it's, you know, people think work in my area, do I have a type of business to become an ESCO? It sounds like there's a lot of flexibility there.
I think the key thing, how are you going to fund the startup of it? That's the thing, because it's like any business, it needs working capital to get it started. So, you know, we've had that from different sources in the different contexts. So we've got some experience now in pulling together the right partners, but it does need something to get it up and running, because people need paying to do it, you know. So that's the key thing.
And yeah, I don't know if this is a quick one to answer or not, but in terms of the model which uses the savings to finance more work, in what, you know, the pilots that you've seen so far, have those savings been significant enough to then finance a lot of good quality ongoing work, or is it a slow thing? Because otherwise, you know, how is it really different from a loan? But if it's,
well, it is a loan. Let's be really clear. Like, it is a loan. It's just a loan. It's basically a loan plus confidence. That's what the package is. So it's a loan that you have to repay. So if the thing didn't make any savings, as a client, you've got to repay it. But the ESCO's role is to give you the confidence, hopefully, that the energy cost savings will be more than enough to allow you to pay for it month by month as you pay it back. So part of that is making sure that you trust the solution that's been implemented and that it's a good experience. And the other part of it is proving or demonstrating the savings, evaluating the savings, so that you can, you know, you've got some evidence that your bills are lower than they otherwise would have been. So it's quite early days on all of that. I mean, I suppose we're applying our more general knowledge of how these projects proceed. We as a firm and as individuals, we've got a lot of experience in that area. But there's certainly, well, the key things are projects are being scoped, projects are being delivered, and third-party finance is being used, it's not being used in every project by any means. A lot of projects are proceeding just based on the client's own funds. So nothing ever kind of pans out exactly according to the textbook. But the point is that stuff is happening that otherwise wouldn't have been happening. And a few years need to go by before we can evaluate it more precisely, I think.
Yeah, no, great. And sorry, there's one more question in the chat from David about could government credit guarantee for the energy efficiency loans make a difference and help in scaling?
I think that would make a huge difference, and actually that's a model that we're advising overseas governments to use. We're literally doing a project in Indonesia where that's the advice, you know. So it would be anything like that would be incredibly helpful. Because at the moment, the only finance really that's available is at commercial rates. And a lot of companies are already indebted up to the eyeballs after COVID and everything that's gone on in the last few years, because they've taken bounce back loans and they've taken every product that's on offer. So taking on additional debt is really, really difficult for them. And a huge range of different, you know, credit worthiness ratings as well, you know, out there. So yes, if anything that can underpin a more competitive or advantageous financial product, recognizing that this is for a special net zero related application, I think would be hugely helpful. Yeah.
Great. Okay, excellent. Well, I think we'll leave it there so we have enough time for a short break. So yes, thank you so much, Alex. That was very insightful. And yeah, if people have more questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll try and deal with them as we go. Yes, otherwise I will see you all back at 3:55 to start in 4 minutes. Just give us a chance to stretch our legs and grab a drink. So see you in a few minutes.
Many thanks. Let me just try and share my screen. Bear with me one moment.
No problem at all. Go for it.
Slideshow. So yeah, can you all see that?
Yes.
Is that fine? Yes. So many thanks for inviting me. My name is Paul Green. I'm the policy advisor at the AE Local Government Association, who has led on the UK Share Prosperity Fund, in particular through its initial design and its rollout. I'm going to go through all the context and some of the opportunities and challenges that exist. This is going to be very high level, so it's not necessarily reflective of every place, and everyone's dealing with this differently. So please bear in mind there's some local variants that exist in this. But one thing I would say is the fund is developed in such a way it enables local places to decide what their priorities are. And local government, whether it's a combined authority or council, has great ambition in the sort of net zero environment, with many calling for a climate emergency and the need to achieve net zero as quickly as possible. So for a little bit of background, this just highlights what was previously existed in terms of European funding. As we mentioned before, there was the European Structural Investment Fund, which consists of predominantly the Regional Development Fund, ERDF, and the Social Fund. The organisations that led this were combined authorities and local enterprise partnerships, again with individual arrangements across the UK. I'm particularly talking about England, so I can't particularly talk about the devolved nations, but they had their own arrangement. In England, at the programme, 5.3 billion was allocated over 7 years, with an additional 3 years to end delivery. And there was requirements for match funding for the vast majority of the funds, which obviously you get from public and private funding sources. So ERDF was never the only pot of fund that existed. There was other funding from a number of different sources that used to provide for some of the ERDF programmes. So we come on to the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the government's ambition following the UK's exit from the European Union. It consists of 3 priorities, which is very different from the European funds. The first priority is around community and places. So this is about your community infrastructure, parks, recreation, antisocial behaviour, high streets, those sort of things. There is a specific priority around supporting businesses, and there's the final one is around people and skills, which in England starts from year 3. How councils choose to spend this is completely up to them. So they may put the majority of their funding in one particular priority, or they may spread it out quite evenly, with the exception obviously of people and skills, which doesn't come into stream on year 3. The difference between this and European funding is it's being led by combined authorities, unitary authorities, and for district councils in 2-tier area, which is very different geography compared to funding stream. So in the north, you could have 7 or 8 districts within the county compared to what previously was a LEP. And so how they choose to spread out this funding between the different priorities will vary from place to place. And they have to balance with, in particular, the different priorities. So, for example, in communities and places, there's been a lot of councils who have decided to put funding into things that address the immediate concerns around the cost of living crisis and, you know, affordable food supermarkets and warm rooms and things like that. So this is a very different fund from the European, the ESIF programme. So it's not a like-for-like replacement. I think the other point to make around it demonstrating it's not a like-for-like replacement is the quantum and longevity of the funding. So as I said before in the previous slide, it was over 5 billion for England over 7 + 3 years. This fund is 2.6 billion in the UK over 2 and realistically 3 months period. So you don't have that sort of longevity that previously existed, and you certainly don't have the quantum based upon those 2 and a bit years. So you have to bear that in mind in terms of how councils are particularly using the funds in that way. So what lead authorities, so those are the combined authorities, unitaries and districts, had to do was develop an investment plan with their stakeholders over a 3-month period. So they had to very quickly utilise all the stakeholder arrangements they had and develop a plan that had gone through their council's decision-making process, which takes time. They were given such a very short period of time to do that. Obviously, that means it limits the sort of stakeholders you can approach, especially new ones. So, for example, if you were in a 2-tier authority and you were leading your fund and you're a district, you would probably go to the partners you know already, and it will take time to develop those new links that you previously may not have had under European funding. So there's sort of a change, the sort of time frame and delivering of this is much shorter, so it perhaps hasn't been as wide-ranging as it could have had councils been given a significantly more time to prepare and a significantly more time to deliver the funds. One of the positives around the fund, though, it does focus on outcomes and interventions rather than programs. So within these investment plans, they had to identify the particular outcomes and interventions they wanted to achieve, which I've highlighted the ones directly related to what we're talking about today, but there's other ones which you could also incorporate into your supporting business priority if that was a key priority for you. And how they do it will vary between area. I would also say that some of the districts have pulled together and commissioned their county to deliver some of this, but that's not universal across the country. So the geographies, once again, change around this, but there is some flexibility built in there, probably compared to the ERDF programme, where you wouldn't necessarily be able to work like that in such a way. So finally, I probably sped through this too quickly, but here's some reflections I just thought as an introduction to the Shared Prosperity Fund you may want to consider. So as I said before, local government have real ambitions, whether it's levelling up, delivering net zero, tackling inequalities, etc. And this fund will be extremely helpful in doing that. But at the same time, the caveat that it's quite a limited fund, and there's a lot of demands on it, especially in the current sort of cost of living crisis, energy prices, etc. So there's a lot of demands, which kind of slightly curtail some of the ambitions, with local authorities having to prioritise what they actually want to deliver. Particularly welcome the flexibility of how the funding is spent. The government has made very clear this is a delegated fund, so there's a lot of local flexibility to deliver what local authorities want to, and there's also flexibility to councils not having to set out what they're going to deliver in year 3 now, outside the outcomes and the interventions that were identified in the investment plan, which allows them the scope and flexibility to change things should the economy change, should there be additional crisis, or whatever may come in the near future. One of the third things to also reflect that for many councils, this sort of funding is new. While there's obviously things like high street funding and levelling up fund and various other funding pots that in particular districts have had, many districts are already involved in European funding or were only involved in certain ways. So that having to come and bring together partners from the sort of lowest level of local government has been quite challenging, but generally they have managed to be able to submit their investment plans and have improvement and have them approved by government. With this obviously comes with the capacity challenges that local government experience. They had to do this very quickly without necessarily having the staff to do it, and the short-termness of the timeframes given to them creates huge recruitment challenges because they're not able to get someone in very quickly. And then we talked about things other people previously mentioned, talking about biodiversity, net gain and things like that. There are wider local government workforce challenges, in particular around in the planning function with finding like the right ecologists, etc. So there's a sort of wider financial challenge local government is experiencing, which is sort of, you must take that into account when thinking about the Shared Prosperity Fund. As I said before, there's challenging timeframes. I don't think a 2.5 year fund is enough to do that sort of long-term ambitions they do, and you can't build those networks that you really need in order to help deliver it. There's still areas we're unclear about. So for example, the government have yet to release the evaluation framework, so councils don't know how they're going to evaluate programmes, what they actually need to submit, and we're hoping that it will be very light touch, but it's that sort of, it's almost government is designing it slightly one step ahead of councils rather than having it as a a final product which they could just go off and deliver. And then finally, just to put on the end, there is also the Rural England Prosperity Fund, which is a predominantly capital fund, which is replacing some of the previous LEADER programme, which came under CAP, which provides capital for rural economy, supporting businesses in their element. And there's an element of potentially new direction around how land management is used there. So I'm not sure how time, I'm probably slightly, that's okay. So if anyone has any questions, please do let me know. And if you need to get in touch with me, my email's there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. That's really useful. So yeah, I think we do have some time to take some immediate questions. We were going to move straight on to the next presentation, but yeah, I think there's time, and there's a comment in the chat about support under UK becoming very patchy, and lots of small pots of funding spread thinly means that it's having limited impact. yeah, I suppose that's more of a comment rather than a question, but something probably would agree with that it does vary very much according to where you are in the country. Then another comment, yeah, just agreeing with the previous one. Next question, how does the LGA intend to evaluate its impact? Does that fall with LGA? Or
we're not a government organisation, so we aren't formally, we'll be evaluating it formally ourselves. That will be up to how government decides to evaluate it. We will support our councils through our offer as much as we can, but obviously we can't design that until we know what government is going to do to evaluate it. So I don't think I could particularly, I think that answers it, but basically we're not the body responsible for making sure they're evaluated, but we are pressing government to get on and tell councils what they expect in terms of measuring outcomes and outputs, etc.
Okay. And yes, given the short time frame, is there any support that is available to make the most of the fund, or any guidance about potential development of partnerships or other things around making use of the fund, or is it?
Well, we're currently we are currently running some action learning sets which we've fully booked, which we work with councils, and then we'll be sharing wider with local government how best to do that. And we're picking up things around evaluation, around partnership building, and you know, approaching the new sort of funding horizon, etc., which we'll share within our membership, because we're a membership organisation, how best to do that.
Yeah.
But if people have good examples or examples you want to share, we will be developing a network of councils which will be able to share and share good practice, etc.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Paul. That's really helpful. And next up, we have an example of how UK SPF funding has been used in practice for business decarbonisation activities, and we're very pleased to have Miranda and Stephen from East Lancashire to talk about their activities. So Stephen Sykes is a Director of Sustainability at the Chamber Low Carbon Programme, and I will hand over to you now, Stephen. Welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you. So I'm going to take, actually I'm quite impressed with our first two speakers, so a lot of the things I'm going to cover, they've touched on to some extent. But just to give you a little bit of a flavour as to what we've been doing here across Lancashire with the Chamber Low Carbon Programme. So I am the Director of Sustainability, but just bear with me, as in, there we go. Just a quick background. I started off in the chemical industry, so I'm not your traditional environmentalist. So that little chap in the white coat, that's me back in 1981. So 16 years in the chemical industry, I jumped ship, as it were, and I ended up in Groundwork, which is an environmental regeneration charity, for 11 years, both at local level, national level, and sub-regional level. So delivering environmental business support programs, I have a wealth of experience and know the pitfalls and things. But then 2008, went self-employed, have done stints with the NHS, universities. I'm co-founder and director of the 2030 Hub in Liverpool, which is the world's first United Nations local hub promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm a B leader, and 2030 Hub is a certified B Corp. So I was quite impressed that our previous speakers both mentioned all those things. So basically what we've done, we've brought all that experience, and I should also say that Miranda, the chief exec, who'll follow me, is also a former colleague of mine from Groundwork from 25 years ago. So we've had a wealth of experience of delivering partnership and business support programs using European funding up to now. So the Chamber Low Carbon Programme is a global award-winning programme. We won the World Chamber's 12th Congress Best Climate Action Project back in 2021. It's a £6 million ERDF part-funded programme. It's Lancashire-wide, and it provides a suite of fully funded services, because nothing's free these days. There's got to be a value associated with it. And basically it's to help businesses to improve their energy and environmental efficiencies, introduce on-site renewable energy generation, and help the businesses save money. We're also looking to reduce the environment and carbon footprint of Lancashire businesses. And the other, so rather than just giving the general decarbonisation advice, we also help businesses who are developing new low carbon technologies to help them to get it to market and trial it being manufactured locally. And obviously the ultimate aim is to increase the competitiveness of Lancashire businesses. So basically what we offer from a business decarbonisation perspective, we offer the one-to-one support. We'll go in and do an energy and environmental review. We'll look at energy efficiency. We'll look at their process efficiency, water. So looking at the company in the round and looking at what are their main pressures and main issues. They'll get a report and a prioritised action plan to help them move the business forward. We run a series of best practice events because, like I say, we want to have that wraparound service around them. So rather than the one-off hit, 12 hours of support and away on to the next one, we want to try and engender that sense of community and that sense of being in it together. We also do some other advanced business support, which is around behaviour change and actually getting businesses to look at how they run and operate their own businesses. And we do a series of masterclasses, one particularly on ISO 14001, because amazingly for SMEs, we did not have any uptake of ISO 50001, which is the energy management system. Most SMEs are interested in the wider general environmental management. So that was on the decarbonisation side. On the low carbon technologies and the development, we actually have a number of specialised consultants who can actually look at the physics of what's being proposed. They can actually look at the technical feasibility. Is there scale up? Is there potential for this? Who's the customer? Where's the market? So we actually give that full wraparound as to how to take that. Usually the inventor who's walked away from a university with proof of concept or the little plastic Tupperware box of wires hanging out and doesn't know where to take it next. That's where we take that person from, where they've actually got something that will work, but then looking at how can we scale it up. And as was mentioned with the previous speaker, we also, as part of our program, got our own local network of, we didn't approve them as technology suppliers, we validated them. We checked them out. Were they a business that was financially sound going forward? We looked for recommendations. We talked to the people that they delivered projects to, and we actually have a database of validated technology solution providers, whether that's photovoltaics, LED, air source heat pumps, the full range. So we're providing services on both sides, both the decarbonisation, but also the adoption of new technologies and the invention of new technologies. But like I say, we were quite keen to actually have that full wraparound support, because the danger, as previously stated, somebody comes in and does a fully funded energy and environmental audit for you. 9 times out of 10, the businesses will either file that under D for draw or B for bin, because they don't perceive a value to it. So in order to create that value, we started to create the newsletters to keep people engaged, keep them up to date with what's going on locally. We also have a number of events. We call them lunch and learns, bring them in on a Friday afternoon, lunchtime, short seminar, and networking with other people who are actually of a like mind, and therefore they actually encourage each other to actually push themselves forward. With our technology and solution providers, they were quite keen that they didn't actually have their own network. They weren't necessarily recognised as a group. So we did a low carbon where a lot of them started, because they were quite small companies, they started to look at what each other was doing, and quite a few of them have teamed up to actually provide combined turnkey solutions to businesses. We have an Energy and Environment Forum, which really focuses on legislation, policy, and it's a place where the businesses can share good practice between themselves. Again, for our solution providers who found that they didn't really have their own space to network, to exchange ideas, we have a technology and innovation forum. And again, it's an opportunity to share good practice and get to know who are the players locally and who are in the best position to actually take advantage of changes in legislation and policy and how they can work together. We also have a circular economy club, again, to create that sense of being part of something bigger and having someone that they can actually look to and actually get advice and guidance from. Not necessarily from the chamber, but from other local businesses. We did have a number of challenges when we first set off in 2018. Initial buy-in and engagement, like I said, because they've not had to put any money forward, it's something that's been offered free. It did, you know, trying to get that engagement and buy-in, you'd have a junior manager be quite keen, but chief exec was not necessarily on board. So then we started to, and we also had a bit of confusion in the marketplace because there was multiple projects. In fact, in Lancashire at the time, we had 4 low carbon projects, all had low carbon in their title somewhere. And if you looked at the Boost, which is the regional economic development part of the county council, with a very brief 100-word description, all 4 projects looked exactly the same, even though they were all chalk and cheese. But that didn't help the businesses. So we had a lot of communication issues in the first place. And then once you do get the businesses on board, you've got them signed up, they're keen to have the audit, you're on site, you do the audit. We found with a lot of SMEs, they actually struggled to give you 12 months of billing information. So actually coming up with a meaningful carbon footprint where you could then identify and target where they should be spending their effort became a challenge. Equally, you know, they would look at, you know, can I have photovoltaics on my roof? Yes, of course you can. And we can tell you how much it'll generate, but until you tell us how much you consume, we can't tell you whether it's going to be worth the expense or the effort. So they were some of the initial challenges that we had. And basically, we then started to change our messages to a large extent. So where there were, we also had a grant in the early day. It was only $500,000, so it wasn't a huge pot of money for the whole county of Lancashire, with some 55,000 businesses plus. So it's relatively small. But then we started to do targeted reviews, energy reviews. So if someone was just interested in, I want a grant and therefore I need some evidence. Equally, when we did our targeted report, we would give them the 3 local validated suppliers, because of course with any grant process they're going to have to get 3 competitive quotes. So we'd already started to reduce and break down that paying barrier. Equally, a number of our local authorities have their own grant pots, and because we've already got a mechanism, a process for actually assessing, will that technology work in that particular premises, that type of business, we can actually go in and do the audit. We can then help them put the quotes together. We can then evaluate the quotes. So a lot of the local authorities signpost businesses to us to have one of our technical reviews, so then they can make sure that their grant pot is actually being spent wisely. 2019 was the UK's year of the environment. So of course we then changed our messaging around the green rose. So obviously Lancashire's got the red rose, so we went with the green rose to create an image, to create a brand. And we looked at utilising an environmental management system to manage, reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. So that was the message we were giving out, that the Green Rose programme was the way that you could actually manage and control your emissions, but also at the same time make yourself more competitive. And equally, at the end of the series of masterclasses, you'd be in a position where you could actually put yourself forward for ISO 14001, ISO 14005, BS 8555. So it wasn't specific to one environmental management system, it was to environmental management systems in the round. And then with the Community Renewal Fund, which was the precursor to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we had a very tight window to try and come up with something new, something different that would entice people. So we basically took advantage of the fact that the Cabinet Office had produced a procurement policy note 621, which was around public sector procurement and the need for including carbon reduction plans. So as you can see, we've just started to put different messages out to get businesses engaged, and also demystify and clarify some of the confusion in the marketplace, because we have brands that they could link onto. So the Green Rose, like I say, it was a way of actually implementing an environmental management system, but it was geared up for the business, not for individuals. And it was run over 6 months, 6 half-day workshops, all standalone, but we combined that with an energy and environmental audit. And the beauty of taking this approach was that energy and environmental audit that we were going to do anyway as part of the standard package now had a vehicle, because like I say, it doesn't go under D for drawer or B for bin. What you've got now is, if they're keen to get an environmental management system because their customer is chasing for ISO 14001, along of them implementing the system, they need to have a management plan that actually tackles their priorities, that tackles their biggest environmental impacts. So we've given them the baseline, and we've now given them a methodology how to take it forward. But if they're going to go down that far route of an environmental management system, we've given them the tools and the means to get there. Like I say, Destination Net Zero, that was really developed because we had a short window where we had to deliver in specific local authority areas. So a new targeted message was needed. And like I said, we based it on PPN 621. So all public sector contracts over 5 million or above, the successful bidder has to have made a public net zero declaration. As part of their tender documents, they've got to submit a carbon reduction plan, which the Cabinet Office have given a standard template. And throughout the delivery of the contract, the successful bidder will not only be measured on how they perform delivering the contract, but also how they're actually implementing their carbon reduction plan. And whilst our target was SMEs initially, what's this got to do with an SME? Because they're not necessarily going to go for £5 million contracts from central government, local authority, Highways England, etc. But the thing is, they will be in someone's supply chain who has gone for that £5 million contract. So they suddenly get sucked into that supply chain and having to report their carbon emissions. So again, we were looking at how can we reduce the pain barrier for our SME, our local businesses, in order to help them to succeed. So basically what we offered was a half-day seminar, which was optional, which gave them the background as to where all this policy procurement notes had come from, what was needed, how to calculate your greenhouse gas inventory, how to develop your targets, how to put your action plan together. And then, like I said, we gave them the tools, the wherewithal to do it, but then offered that the team, and we have a team of 8 here, they would come in and actually do the carbon footprint for them. They'd map out all their greenhouse gas emissions, and they'd help them put their targets and put their carbon reduction plan together. And one of the things that we discovered as a surprise, because under the Community Renewal Fund programme, we were no longer restricted to SMEs. The number of large companies, or companies that are classed as large companies, so they could be a unit of a multinational based here in Lancashire. They might only have 60 people on site, but they've never been able to access business support before because they've been classed as not being an SME, even though in the big wide world, the parent company might treat them as a standalone cost centre and they've just got to survive. What we noticed with the Community Renewal Fund is the larger company, or the ones who are classed as being non-SME, they welcomed us with open arms. They could find the data straight away. They were just keen to get some support because they'd never had that support previously. And that's all I really wanted to say about the programme, because like I said, there was 2 elements. There was the decarbonisation and the innovation, low carbon innovation support side of things, which, as we move to UK Shared Prosperity, we've now separated those 2 activities out into the Chamber Low Carbon brand and another brand called Red Cat, which is the Lancashire Centre for Alternative Technologies. And both of these have been offered to the local authorities. So I'll stop sharing and I shall hand over to Miranda.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That's great. So yeah, very interesting to hear what the service looks like in terms of the offering for businesses, and it's yeah, really comprehensive and inspiring. And yes, so now to talk a bit more about the UK SPF funding side of things, I would like to invite Miranda Barker, OB, Chief Executive of East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us, Miranda.
Thank you very much. Sorry I arrived late. Glad I was on time for this bit. I'm just literally adding in 5 minutes that's specifically around the funding sources and the advantages and disadvantages of the fact that we're now looking at UK SPF, which hopefully spurs some thinking about where we go next with business support funding. As Stephen said, we've been working together in this space of supporting businesses using public sector funding on low carbon and environmental initiatives since 1996, 1997. So that's from absolutely in the middle of the European structural funding delivery, and then all the way through the various iterations of its management. When we started off then, the funding at that point was being dealt with through regional action plans, a sort of northwest level, and then it went periodically upwards and downwards, and you went into a local authority where it was, for instance, I was in Wigan then. So then you had local authority action plans, and then you went up to the development agency level, and then you ended up going to with it being run from, for instance, Lancashire county-wide level. During the whole of that evolution, what you saw was a situation where at certain points in time, there was a really severe case of a postcode lottery, as they call it, with what funding was available for businesses in what area. So you could, at some points when they were being managed by locally bid for programs, have one lot of support available for an environmental audit or to start a business or to scale a business on one side of the road, and on the other side of the road in a different local authority area, there was no support available for businesses to do that. And that was a very dire situation to be in. And gradually that improved with things going up to be delivered over larger scales. So at least you had a Lancashire-wide programme, for instance, or a Greater Manchester-wide programme, for instance. And that made more sense in terms of businesses not being massively irate about the fact that they couldn't achieve the same kind of support as the one nearby, but also much better economies of scale in terms of the depth and breadth of programmes you could have and the expertise you could recruit. So we saw some really good transformational programmes focusing on sectors across the development agency footprint when it was there, or across things like Greater Manchester, etc. So since we've transitioned over, as we're in the middle of now, to UK Shared Prosperity funding, we've seen that in certain areas, such as Lancashire, where it's a two-tier authority level, that the funding now has the potential to go back to being a really severe case of uneven distribution across the county, across the business community. And the fact that we will end up with situations where in some places there is a complete desert in terms of business support. And not just, can you help me with my energy bills? Can you help me with transitioning to net zero? But literally, can you help me start a business? Can you help me scale a business? Can you help me import or export? There will be some geographies where there is literally no business support available. And I'm very grateful that Paul did all his breakdown, because he saved me having to do the breakdown of how the funding's all given out. But exactly as he says, the funding has gone down to district level or unitary authority level in Lancashire and been wrapped up across these three priority areas of community renewal, business support, or education and skills. And in some cases, you have quite proactive local authorities. For going to use names of authorities, no, I won't, because I won't use the bad ones. But in some cases, you've got larger authorities where they're unitary perhaps, and they've got quite an economic focus, and they've made a definite decision that they will have some of this funding focused on business support and growing their economy and growing their business rates coming in from that. But in some areas, you've got a situation where the very small district authorities locally haven't had to fund business support for the last 47 years at a district level. They haven't had to recognise that that support needs to be there, otherwise you don't grow the businesses. And we have seen very often that the same group of people on a panel who were used to build a levelling up fund application have then been used to sift the UK Shared Prosperity Fund applications. So people who were focusing on community renewal and local development, quite rightly, the levelling up, have then gone on to assess the levelling up, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So you haven't got an audience of people who have seen business support being delivered by growth hubs and now realise that this is now the only way business support will be funded, or skills support will be funded. So we have areas where in some cases none of that funding is going towards business support, or very selected areas going towards business support. And that's going to create this area where there's literally some places where there is no business support to do something which is really becoming more and more vital for businesses' survival. The last thing I want to say is around the support for things like new innovation development. If you're trying to develop new low carbon innovations, so new aerospace innovations. Previously, across Lancashire, for instance, and a lot of places across the UK, we've got very, very strong innovation support that comes through universities and then translates down into support on the ground to help those businesses manufacture those new innovations locally. And what we're seeing with the change to UK Shared Prosperity funding is that you've got all of those innovation support programs in universities coming to an end. So that will cease. But also you don't have the ability, with funding broken down to the local level, to get enough local authorities together to create something which is innovation orientated or transformational for a sector. It's very, very difficult to get local authorities to aggregate that money back together to do something transformational. So I worry that we're not only creating a postcode lottery with things like low carbon funding for decarbonisation, we're also hampering our innovation development and then our commercialisation of those technologies to really keep our forefront position on low carbon innovation. I hope that helps. Any questions, but obviously about Stephen's presentation about the very positive delivery side of things, as well as about my moans. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Miranda. That's very useful to hear. And yeah, we can go to some questions. Feel free to post them in the chat, both to Sam and Miranda. And then, yeah, if there's time allows, we can have a bit more of a general discussion hosted by my colleague David Wetherall. But yes, well, I don't see any, there's some comments in the chat, but maybe no immediate questions. But yes, I mean, just one from my side. I mean, in your delivery, what was the transition like to the Shared Prosperity Fund? Were there any issues, or from a delivery side, quite seamless? I see smiles, probably not.
The delivery side for the businesses on the ground, we don't foresee being too confusing because we're keeping the same brand name effectively in terms of Chamber Low Carbon. So that will be there. They should hopefully see that this is there, it's carrying on, and have a general understanding of what's in there. The problem is coming from the fact that I am moaning, I am sorry. I'm glad Stephen was being so positive about what we're actually doing. And I've spent literally since about June last year talking to 14 different local authorities to try and actually get take up of this. And we are still negotiating with people about taking things forward. So although the businesses won't see a perceived change in terms of what they receive and who it feels like is giving that to them, it's taken a lot of energy from local authorities as well, you know. Not just from me, from local authority staff who are meant to be working there with their business communities and their local communities. And I'm not sure that this has been a brilliant example of how to do it. I think part of the problem has come from the fact that when we were trying to shape this funding scheme, we had lots and lots of consultations going into government from European structural funding panels, of which I was the chair in Lancashire, and various other local authorities, public sector, private sector. And then all of those people who were hearing those messages were pulled away to go and deal with Brexit. And then they reformed and we started the conversations again. How should we construct this? How should we make it? And then they were all pulled away to deal with COVID. And then they came back again. So the problem is we've ended up with quite short, shallow conversations about how to structure it. And some things were well communicated, like the fact it shouldn't be limited to a 12-hour tick box. It should involve us able to work with large companies, not small, not just SMEs. Those things have been taken through and are really good. But it's this kind of strange breaking it down to very small levels that has hampered the business support side more, I think, than community renewal, etc. Some things are very sensible to be done at a local level. I'm not sure that it enables transformational business support programs very easily.
Yeah. Yeah, very good points there raised about and how it's hampering innovation. It's very piecemeal and small scale approach. Okay, I don't keep you any longer, but I'd just like to give a big virtual round of applause to all of our speakers, Robin, Alex, Paul, Stephen and Miranda. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your views, really useful to us and very insightful. And thank you to everyone who attended. For more information about future events on the LEAP4SME project, please refer to our website for future events, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon, everyone.